Oh hey, it's Wes. And Maggie. You just keep taking my chair. And today, it's time to talk about something new. Always excited when Godox comes out with something new. Except, it's not exactly Godox. They've created a new badge for a new line of lights. I don't know why. And, can I have my tea? Thank you. It is the Litemons LA150D and 150B for Bi-color. Now, when this was first announced, it was announced at about the same time as something else, which made me have a clever thought. The clever thought was this, that the Litemons was in some way related to the Smallrig RC120B. However, upon closer inspection, once I got both of them in the studio here, they are not the same. The internal components appear to be different, the power levels are totally different, power supply and the voltage requirements are totally different, fan and air design, totally different. They just have a similar form factor, that's about it. Moving right along, now that we've cleared that one up, we're still going to compare it to this very closely because it is obviously the most direct competition. And as always, we're going to start out with the categories with the build quality. This Litemons light, set almost to minimum, is made of a very rigid plastic. Has a little bit of flex to it, not a lot, but it is very hard. Now, the Smallrig is made of a softer plastic, which I feel like each has their ups and downs. This is going to take some bumps a little bit better, but if I were to drop one, I'm pretty sure this one's more likely to crack than the Smallrig is. I'm not sure which way to go on that one. I have a nice, robust DC power connector. Knobs feel okay, just a little bit plasticky. Pretty solid, easy to read screen. Got a metal Bowens mount on the front here. And nice metal arm, umbrella holder, all that stuff, very nice. The power brick, let me fish that up here, is huge, which introduces some problems, the nature of which we will discuss later on. Speaking of build quality, I don't usually bring this up, but I did also in the SL100D video. This AC power cord is gigantic. It is massive, it is incredibly thick, it is twice the size that it needs to be for the amount of power that it carries. They give you a quality cable, but it is enormously overkill. Take that how you want. But unfortunately, one further note with regards to build quality, the power switch on this, and this is why I'm coming back at a later date, no longer works. That's why sometimes I complain about the buttons and switches being plasticky or generic. This is a run-of-the-mill generic power switch. I could replace this for 50 cents. I'd have to buy a few of them though. And I opened it up to see if it would be an easy job, and yeah, it would be a pretty easy job to resolder a new power switch in that, but it's pretty disappointing. As you can see, the power switch on this, very generic, nothing interesting, is just an off-the-shelf component, whereas the one on the Smallrig looks a little bit more specialized. Although, I can't guarantee any particular duty cycles on any of these switches. I highly doubt that the other switches in anyone else's unit would fail as quickly as this. It's just a one-off. They bulk bought a whole bunch of generic power switches, and this one was a bad one. It worked out of the box, so it's not a QA thing. It's just using kind of cheap parts to get a value price out of this, and we'll talk about value real soon. So overall, I'm going to give this a build quality of 7 out of 10. Feature set. We have Bluetooth connectivity with the same Godox app as before. You open it up and boom, it's like, hey, there's another light in this room, let's connect to it. So that was great, easy onboarding process. You've got a metal Bowens mount, huge deal for me. I hate it when lights don't have those. Now the weird thing is, this is powered on a 48 volt DC. That introduces some problems, which for me, it's like, why bother doing the DC thing in the first place if you can't use an external battery? 48 volts is a lot. Whereas the Smallrig runs on 12 to 30 volts. So it's very versatile for plugging in an external battery. Now, I put labels on these two power supplies because A, if I plug the Smallrig into the Godox, it won't turn on, not enough voltage. If I were to plug the Godox Litemons into the Smallrig, it would probably murder it because it has twice the amount of voltage it's expecting. Coming back at this, I would be remiss if I did not mention the big advantage of using 48 volt DC power in versus 12. With 48, we can do this. Here is our 48 volt XLR power connector. I can take a run-of-the-mill XLR audio cable, plug it in here, and this can be a very long cable. And then plug it in here, and let there be light. A little bit too much light. Now, on the 12 volt line, if we were using the Smallrig, we'd be looking at least 11 amps over this cable. Now, this cable right here, let's have a look at the ratings on it. There are no ratings on this cable, which leads me to the piece of advice. An XLR cable is supposed to be rated for 15 amps on the line. But this is a part of an older spec in that originally XLR cables were often used to provide power to speakers. This isn't done nearly as much as it used to be, so a lot of XLR cables are now constructed with the understanding that they're just going to be used for an audio stream. Usually just balanced audio, sometimes left-right pairing, and often some phantom power. Now, phantom power is often over 40 volts, but usually very, very low current, so nothing to worry about there. This one, however, at 48 volts, we're only looking around 3 amps. That is a lot less, and there is really no risk in running 3 amps through this for an extended period of time because that is well below spec. Now, you'd want to make sure you're using a nice quality cable because, again, we are literally playing with fire here in trying to run large amounts of power through cables of perhaps dubious spec. Again, this doesn't have a rating stamped on it, even though this is a nice XLR cable. They just don't care about current ratings much anymore. I could take a 20, 30, possibly even a 50-foot XLR cable and plug this in here and give myself a lot more versatility, especially for like sending something up a light stand. We've got that giant chonky power adapter. Now I can shove that off somewhere else and be perfectly safe. As always though, you want to make sure your power adapters are kept in a place that is well ventilated so they don't gather and just continually absorb heat. You want to make sure that they can breathe and ventilate. As far as features go, this is rated at 190 watts. And the Bi-color version goes all the way up to 230 watts. One more feature is, yes, it does have the effects modes, but honestly, I am not a big fan of effects modes when it comes to daylight balanced LEDs. They're flashy. The only thing they're really good for is the lightning effect. There it is there, seizure warning, I'm sorry. But all the other effects are not super useful. Whereas when you have a bi-colored one, you can move into like a warmer tone of like a TV or a fire or a candle much more easily than you can with this where you have to modify it. The fan on this is a little bit troublesome. As soon as you turn it on, the fan's on. Fan's on full speed at 0%. When you crank it up to 100%, fan's still running at the exact same speed. What an odd choice that was. But when you turn this up to 100% power, it's using 169 watts. So it's actually only a tiny bit more than the Smallrig light, even though it's advertised as being 190 watts. It doesn't get that far. It does, however, get a little bit further, so it is still more light for your money. But overall, we are missing some features here. We don't have a bi-color on this, so the bi-color version of this would score higher in features, and we can't run on battery, and the fan is a little bit janky, so we're going to give that a 6 out of 10 for features. Light quality. That's arguably what's the most important thing here, and this has a CRI of 96, a TLCI 97. That's very good. Not the very best, but almost. And you got a Bowens mount, so you can modify this however you want, which is fantastic. That's going to be a 9 out of 10 for light quality. Cha-ching. Usability. Power output range is good, but I'd like to see a nice slow, very low bottom curve below 10%. The Smallrig has that. This Godox light does not, however. So as soon as you turn it on, It is quite bright. It's nice to have the ability to be even dimmer at the certain lowest power level in case you're shining this straight at something. It can be a little overwhelming. But once you get above that, it's a nice linear line going right up to the top, so it's very predictable and easy to adjust. That's great. The Bluetooth, again, as I said before, super easy to use. One huge usability hit is this thing is tiny. We have about the same amount of power as this SO152, and it's half the size. That's phenomenal. So if I'm going to a video shoot, I can stick 2 of these in the same amount of space that I had one SO150 Mark II. That is a huge win in my books. It's also very light. We've got a bright, easy to read screen that's visible in a lot of circumstances. Off-axis viewing is very good. If you're looking at it from above, it's a little bit sketchy, but when are you going to be looking at this light from above? That would be an unusual situation. The arm is fantastic, like unexpectedly so. Like this thing locks down, I think, better than my 8600 Pro. So it's fully linear, and you have the arm that pops out in and out so you can move it around. And when you lock it down, it locks down hard. I don't know if that's going to wear out over time, but as it stands right now, it is a fantastic locking arm. It has just a spring detent on the umbrella holder. Some people prefer a screw detent. I could go either way on that. I don't usually use an umbrella in the wind, so. The only hit against the usability is that the fans, as I said before, they're not dynamic, but they're also louder than I'd like. They're a constant 42 decibels. A lot of situations, especially when it's behind a softbox, you're probably not going to hear it. It isn't the quietest. It's not as quiet as the Smallrig, and it's way louder than a lot of the super silent options out there. Overall, for usability, this is fantastic, and it's a 9 out of 10. Value, and this is a Godox Lite. Well, it's a Litemons Godox Lite, and it's in competition, some very direct competition, so this is an important one. Let's see how it does. We have 4 Litemons lights. We've got LA150s and LA200s, and each one there is a daylight version and a bicolor version. So, for this daylight version, we're looking at $220. That's a solid price. For the 200 watt version, $300. If we want the bicolor version of this, $260. How does it compare? It compares exactly. I feel like somebody was reading someone else's homework here. The Smallrig lights have the exact same prices. So the Daylight Smallrig is $220 as well. Just not quite as bright. It's close, but not quite there. If we compare this to the Godox lights, we've got the SL100D is $180, less power, quite a bit less power. Then you have the SL150W Mark II, it's right here, that's $340, a lot more money. Neewer makes a 200 watt light for $240, a little bit more power. Not sure if I trust Neewer, a lot of the time I don't. I've had a lot of bad experiences with them. Nanlite, pretty common in this space. They have the FS150, competes directly, also $220. Anyway, there's a lot of other stuff. We can work our way all the way up to the Aperture C120 Mark II for $545, but at the end of the day, the point is you cannot get this amount of light in this general form factor for less than this. $220 is the bottom. So that's got to be a 10 out of 10. So what does that give us? For an overall score, that gives us a 41 out of 50. It's funny because we have totally different scores across the board between this and the Smallrig, but they got the same score in total at the end. So really it comes down to what you need for your particular application and how it works out for you. If you have any thoughts about this new series of Godox Light, the Litemons, let me know down in the comments below. If you want to buy one of these, please feel free to use the links down below to help support this channel and feed my fat cats. So, until next time, I can't decide. Let's go take some photos.